Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're tackling quite a stack of sources today. We've got articles, research papers, some really interesting notes from places like Reddit and more. And it's all focused on getting under the skin of Generation Z.
Yeah, this is a generation that gets talked about constantly, doesn't it? Sometimes celebrated, sometimes maybe a bit unfairly labeled. We've pulled together material from, Sapien Labs, Politico, the Colorado Health Institute, SAMHS, Pew Research, that present report. Lots of different angles.
Absolutely. And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to get past those surface level takes.
Right.
We want to pull out the most important insights, maybe some surprising facts, and just get a clearer, more informed picture of who Gen Z actually is right now, especially, given they've grown up completely in this digital age. So let's get into it.
Okay.
So who are we talking about here? The sources, they kind of paint this picture of a group that's often described as, well, more educated, maybe even more well-behaved than previous generations were at their age.
That comes through. But there's this flip side, this duality you mentioned, a really significant increase in stress and depression being reported. Yeah. It's a theme that just keeps coming up.
Yeah.
And the defining thing really is that they are the first true digital natives. I mean, for them, constant internet, mobile tech, it's not something new. It's just normal. It's the air they breathe.
It's their native environment, exactly. They're using online platforms for everything, aren't they? Not just texting or calls, but, exploring who they are, learning stuff, expressing themselves, building communities.
It's totally integrated into pretty much every part of daily life.
And nowhere is that clearer than, well, their relationship with their phones.
Oh, definitely. There was one statistic from that V-Present report that really stopped me. A huge 83% of Gen Z feel they have an unhealthy relationship with their phone.
83%. Wow. Just let that sink in. That's almost everyone in that group feeling uneasy about it.
It's massive. And the screen time numbers, they really show how central these devices are. 80% are spending 3 or more hours just on their phones every single day.
3 hours minimum for 80%.
And it goes up from there. 40% spend 5 or more hours. And get this, 20%, 1 in 5, are spending 7 or more hours a day.
7 hours.
The average works out to about 5 hours a day just on their phone.
5 hours. That's like a part-time job every day. Now, Sapien Labs, they had some really compelling data connecting this early and constant digital life directly to mental well-being, right?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe quite concerning. Sapien Labs found this clear link. Mental well-being consistently improved the older someone was when they got their first smartphone or tablet.
So waiting longer was better for mental health?
Significantly better. And this finding was particularly dramatic for females.
Okay, how big was that difference based on when they got that first phone?
Well, for females, the percentage reporting mental health challenges like clinical level symptoms dropped from a really worrying 74% if they got a smartphone at age 6.
74% at age 6.
Yeah, all the way down to 46% if they waited until they were 18.
That's a huge drop.
It is. And for males, it went from 42% at age 6 down to 36% at age 18. Still a drop, but the impact seems even starker for young girls.
That 74% figure for girls getting phones so young, that's incredibly high. What does that suggest about that early exposure?
Well, it strongly suggests that those early years, those foundational developmental years, are just incredibly sensitive.
Yeah.
And introducing that constant digital connection, that potential for comparison and curated reality so early, it might really disrupt critical processes for mental function. Sapien Labs saw improvements across key areas like social self, so how you see yourself in relation to others, mood and outlook, and adaptability and resilience, all correlating with getting that first smartphone later.
Right. And the sources also mentioned that connection between problematic phone use and FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Yes, especially in students. That constant need to check, driven by the fear of missing something, it just feeds that cycle, doesn't it? Keeping them glued to the phone.
In this constant digital world, it's not just changing behavior, is it? The sources suggest it's actually reshaping how they think, their cognition.
That's right. It can lead to, being really efficient at finding information quickly, which is definitely a skill.
Sure.
But the flip side is potential overload, constant distraction, and maybe, just maybe, less space for that deep critical thinking, processing things more superficially, perhaps.
And that cognitive shift seems really tightly connected to the mental health picture, which the sources basically describe as a crisis for this generation.
It does. That Sapien Labs data, looking across 79 countries, it's stark. Younger adults, 18 to 34, have a drastically lower average mental health quotient score, the MHQ, compared to older adults, say 55 and up.
How big is that gap we're talking about?
Well, the average MHQ for the younger group is just 38. For the older group, it's over 60 points higher. The key thing here isn't just a small dip. It's the scale of the mental health challenges. We're talking about a significant portion experiencing clinical-level symptoms that actually impair their daily functioning. It's a really stark contrast to older generations.
Impairing function, so it's affecting their ability to, work, study, have relationships, just live day to day.
Exactly. The data shows younger adults have a higher prevalence of problems with things like planning, focus, social interactions, relationships, self-control, and even more concerning, things like suicidal thoughts, aggression, detachment from reality, all significantly higher compared to older adults.
Now, the sources do touch on that ongoing debate about social media specifically and whether it causes these mental health issues.
Right. And it's important to be nuanced here. While some research definitely points towards links, social media use, and depression, anxiety, suicide risk in adolescents, the Surgeon General's advisory in 2023 noted there isn't actually universal agreement among researchers about direct causal links across all young people and all types of platforms.
So it's not definitively proven across the board.
Not definitively proven as a simple cause and effect for everyone, no. But the level of concern is extremely high. The potential risks are clear, especially for developing minds. That's why the 2024 advisory called for warning labels on social media platforms. Acknowledging the potential harm is crucial.
Okay, so the connection is complex, it's still being unpacked, but the red flags are definitely there, especially for younger users. And really frustratingly, even when Gen Z knows they need help, the sources point to huge barriers in actually getting that mental health support.
Oh, absolutely. This is really highlighted in the Colorado Health Institute report.
Yeah.
In Colorado, for Gen Z who needed mental health care but didn't get it, over half said cost was the reason.
50.1%.
Cost, number one barrier.
Yeah. And then nearly 3 in 5 of the 18 to 26-year-olds thought their insurance wouldn't cover it anyway. That was 42.6% overall being put off by insurance worries. And then, even if you overcome those, a massive 71.6% said they just had trouble getting an appointment. So it costs too much, you think insurance won't pay, and you can't get in to see anyone anyway. That's a terrible combination when you're struggling.
It really stacks the odds against getting help. And these challenges, the mental health struggles, the digital immersion, they seem really intertwined with another big theme in the sources: loneliness.
Yes, the loneliest generation label. It comes up a lot. The Cigna report found 53% reporting loneliness.
Over half. That's a striking number.
It really is. Why? What do the sources suggest is driving this?
Well, several things come up. One is that extensive social media use might lead to lots of connections, but maybe more superficial ones. Less depth, perhaps.
Right. Quantity over quality, maybe?
Possibly. Other factors mentioned include things like a lack of historical conception, maybe feeling a bit disconnected from the past. Also something called atomic narcissism, which sounds intense, but suggests maybe a hyper-focus on the individual self that makes broader community connection harder.
Interesting.
And just simply substituting online interactions for face-to-face ones is seen as a factor, too.
And the health consequences of being lonely. They're serious, right? It's not just feeling sad.
No, they are profound. Loneliness is linked to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, even premature death.
Wow.
One source puts the mortality impact on par with smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day.
15 cigarettes a day, that really puts it into perspective. It's a major public health issue, not just a social one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It underscores how serious social disconnection is. But here's something genuinely surprising from the sources that sort of complicates that simple phones cause loneliness narrative.
Oh, what's that?
Well, one meta-analysis looked at trends over time. It suggests loneliness did increase gradually, starting way back in the late 1970s up until about 2019.
Okay.
But, and this is the key part, it seems to have remained relatively stable since 2012. Which is roughly when smartphones really took over the market.
Stable since 2012, so the big smartphone boom didn't cause a further sharp increase in loneliness, according to this study.
That's what this analysis suggests, which leads those researchers to propose that maybe other societal changes happening since the 70s are more responsible for the long-term upward trend, rather than just blaming the phones that arrived later.
Yeah.
Phones clearly play a role now, but they might not be the sole driver of the increase itself over the last decade.
That is fascinating. So broader, earlier shifts might have laid the groundwork, and the digital environment interacts with that.
That's one interpretation, yeah. It adds a layer of complexity. But regardless of the exact starting point or cause, the outcome is clear. Social isolation causes long-term psychological harm. Lower happiness, less satisfaction, more pessimism, depressive symptoms.
Yeah.
It feeds into low self-esteem, makes forming relationships harder, impacts problem-solving skills, leads to an unstable sense of self. It's damaging.
And those online friendships, while maybe offering some connection, they can sometimes make things worse or at least different when it comes to conflict.
That came up in a Reddit discussion mentioned in the notes. The idea that some Gen Z folks might prefer online friendships because, well, if conflict arises, it's easy just to block someone or create a whole new identity.
Avoidance, basically.
Exactly. Which could point to maybe underdeveloped skills or resilience when it comes to handling difficult emotions or navigating conflict in real-world relationships. A preference for just cutting ties rather than working through it.
Yeah, that resonates with other things mentioned about maybe struggling with criticism or conflict.
It seems linked. And it's
Yeah.
worth pointing out this isn't just about young people. The sources also mention caregivers, especially younger adults, caught in that sandwich generation, caring for kids, and older relatives reporting high levels of loneliness too.
Yeah.
Even surrounded by family, they can feel emotionally isolated.
Right. Okay, so given how much of their life happens online, it makes sense that the sources show big shifts in how Gen Z thinks about identity and relationships too.
Absolutely. Identity seems less defined by those traditional external markers like your job title or your family role. It's more about self-determined things, experiences, hobbies, social circles, personal values. It feels more curated and constantly evolving, especially through their online presence.
That curation idea leads straight into personal branding, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources talk about them systematically marketing themselves through their online profiles, their style choices, keeping an eye on trends. It's this active construction of a self for, well, public consumption.
And how does this digital-first approach affect the quality of their relationships? You mentioned superficiality earlier.
Yeah, the platforms allow for a huge number of connections, right?
Yeah.
But the sources consistently suggest these relationships often lack the depth, the intimacy you get from face-to-face interaction.
And that constant online exposure, it fuels comparison.
Massively. That curated perfection online can lead to intense social comparison, making people feel inadequate about their own lives, their own relationships.
Right.
And there's research suggesting teens who spend more time interacting virtually might have lower empathy, struggle more reading emotional cues in person.
Which just highlights how important face-to-face still is for developing those core social and emotional skills.
It's crucial. All those nonverbal cues, facial expressions, body language, tone, they're so vital for building real trust, empathy, authentic bonds. And those often get lost, or at least flattened, online.
But it's not all negative, is it? The digital space does offer some real positives, too.
Oh, for sure. The sources are clear on that. Online spaces can be absolutely vital for finding community, especially for marginalized groups like LGBTQI plus youth. Finding affirming, supportive spaces online is linked to fewer depressive symptoms, a real sense of belonging they might not find offline.
That's a really important counterpoint. What about teen romantic relationships specifically? Any insights there?
Yeah, Pew Research had some concerning data points, like 31% of teens with dating experience had a partner had checked up on them constantly online or via phone, asking where they are, who they're with, multiple times a day.
Wow, that sounds like monitoring.
It does. And 21% said a partner had read their texts without permission. So it raises real questions about privacy, trust, and control within relationships, kind of enabled or amplified by the tech.
Definitely.
And the sources also mention a trend towards more casual relationships and also using ghosting, just cutting off all contact suddenly as a way to end things, which, unsurprisingly, is linked to worse emotional well-being for the person who gets ghosted.
Yeah, being ghosted is rough. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. How does Gen Z approach the world of work? And what other broader concerns are really weighing on them?
Well, at work, the sources suggest a really strong emphasis on work-life balance, setting boundaries. They seem to largely reject that old idea that you have to constantly overwork to be successful.
Yeah, the hustle culture maybe isn't their main goal.
Seems not.
Yeah.
They value flexibility, transparency from employers, and they really want a sense of purpose in what they do. It's not just about the paycheck.
But their financial priorities are still quite focused on security, aren't they?
Very much so. I mean, they've seen economic instability firsthand, recessions, rising costs, the whole student debt crisis.
Right.
So job security and financial stability are deeply important. A striking 74% said stability and salary matter more than being in a fast-growing field or a cool location.
74% prioritizing stability and salary.
Yeah. And 72% of undergrads are more likely to apply for a job if the starting salary is high. Plus, about a third, 32%, feel like they're already behind where their parents were financially at the same age.
So they value security, but at the same time, they seem less likely than maybe previous generations to just stick it out in a bad job purely for that stability.
That seems to be the key difference, yeah. They want security, but not at any cost. If their expectations around the work environment, the culture, the purpose, that flexibility,
Right.
if those aren't met, they're more willing to leave, even if it means less short-term stability.
Interesting balance. Okay, what other big concerns came through in the sources? Things that are really impacting them?
Gun control and school safety were huge. A massive 75% reported feeling stressed by mass shootings. And tragically, firearms became the leading cause of death for children and teens back in 2020.
That statistic is just devastating. You can absolutely understand why that would be a major source of stress growing up.
It's a heavy reality.
Yeah.
But amidst all these serious concerns, there was an interesting side note about Gen Z potentially being, well, better digital parents than previous generations when their time comes.
Oh, how so? What's the thinking there?
It came up in some discussions like on Reddit, where older people observe that Gen Z seems really aware of the dangers of electronic addiction because they've lived it.
First-hand experience.
Exactly. And some are apparently already planning to delay introducing screens to their own kids, maybe reacting against seeing younger siblings or cousins constantly on tablets, which some parents today might rely on more heavily.
That's a fascinating thought, a potential generational course correction based on their own lived experience. What about their own experience in education right now? Any insights from educators?
Yeah, some Gen Z educators voiced pretty significant concerns. Things like low academic standards, students seeming less interested in learning for its own sake, difficulty teaching core skills like grammar or critical thinking. And the recurring idea that constant exposure to electronics has really damaged attention spans, meaning they need constant hyperstimulation to stay engaged in a classroom setting.
That sounds incredibly challenging for teachers.
Yeah.
And it points back to those cognitive shifts we talked about earlier.
It really does. It paints a picture of a generation whose whole way of processing information has been shaped by digital media, which then clashes sometimes with traditional learning methods. Oh, and on a lighter note, the sources also mention that trend of pseudo-nostalgia.
Pseudo-nostalgia.
Yeah, like being nostalgic for the 90s or 2000s, even if they weren't actually alive then or were very young. It influences fashion, music, cultural trends.
Right, I've seen that. Okay, so we have this complex picture. Deep digital immersion, mental health challenges, loneliness, shifting values around work and identity. Given all that, what do the sources suggest in terms of, paths forward, strategies, solutions?
There's a strong emphasis on education and empowerment for both young people and their parents. For parents, things like proactively managing social media risks, fighting the stigma around mental illness, talking openly about risky online stuff. The sources really highlight that having those open, proactive conversations with young people about social media can actually lead to more positive experiences for them online.
So communication is key, and better digital literacy education overall.
Definitely. Education specifically designed for parents and for youth, helping everyone navigate this complex digital world more safely and effectively. And there were also recommendations aimed squarely at the tech platforms themselves, from the Task Force on Kids Online Health and Safety.
Right. What did they suggest the platforms change?
Things like minimizing features that quantify everything, visible like counts, follower counts, the stuff that fuels social comparison.
Get rid of the numbers, basically.
Or at least make them less prominent. Also, allowing users to easily disable comments, making comment settings default to friends only for minors, being more transparent about safety stuff, and doing a better job tackling online bias and discrimination.
So changing the design of the platforms themselves, not just relying on users to manage it all. What about ideas for redefining human connection in this digital age?
Yeah, some practical ideas came up. TXO style suggested things like unplug to plug in, basically. Intentionally carving out tech-free time every day to actually engage with people in the real world.
Setting boundaries with tech.
Exactly. And also bringing more creativity to video calls, like having themed virtual parties or activities to make those digital interactions feel a bit warmer, more connected, less just like a functional check-in.
Trying to inject more genuine interaction into the online space, too. There was also a really interesting finding about how to teach digital well-being effectively, wasn't there?
Yes, this was really significant. It found that anchoring conversations about tech use in core values, things like justice, autonomy, community, connection, is way more effective at motivating actual behavior change than just talking about risks versus benefits or telling people to use self-control.
So instead of just screen time bad, it's more like, how does your tech use align with your value of genuine connection, or how does it affect your ability to pursue your goals?
Precisely. Focusing on the why, how tech fits into what they actually care about, seems to hit home more. And related strategies included teaching them about persuasive design.
How the apps are built to hook you.
Yeah, the design tricks. Also helping them identify negative thinking patterns, those thinking traps that tech can sometimes amplify, and just encouraging reflection on their own tech habits.
Making them more conscious consumers of the tech. What about making actual mental health support more accessible?
The American Counseling Association pointed out that simply offering electronic ways to make initial contact or schedule appointments, email, secure messaging, can make counseling feel less intimidating and more approachable for Gen Z. They might be less likely to pick up the phone cold.
Meeting them where they are, communication-wise, makes sense.
Absolutely. Adapting those access points is crucial. And finally, on loneliness, especially male loneliness.
Yes, that came up too.
Some suggestions included encouraging men to build stronger social bonds with other men, maybe through things like gaming communities or just fostering those close male friendships, the bromances. And also thinking about creating more public spaces designed to actually facilitate group activities, making it easier for connections to happen naturally.
Okay. So stepping back from this deep dive, looking at all these sources, the picture that really emerges is of a generation just fundamentally shaped by growing up entirely digital.
Yeah, uniquely so.
They're navigating some really significant challenges because of it. Mental health, loneliness, figuring out identity in this world of constant comparison and curated online selves. But at the same time, they're showing new ways of thinking about work, valuing purpose and balance. And maybe, just maybe, they have the potential to approach digital parenting differently because of what they've lived through.
There's definitely that tension running through everything we looked at, isn't there? The incredible benefits of digital connection, finding community, especially for those who feel marginalized,
Right.
versus the very real potential harms of superficiality, comparison, addiction, the mental health impacts.
It's a really complex interplay between the individual, their environment, the tools they use, and it leaves us with a really thought-provoking question drawn from these sources for you, the listener, to think about.
Given this blend of digital and physical life that defines Gen Z and the profound challenges they face navigating it all, what responsibility lies where? With individuals, parents, educators, what of the tech platforms themselves? Where does the responsibility lie for fostering genuine well-being and connection in this new landscape?
A complex question indeed. For a complex generation, something these sources definitely compel us all to consider.